Street Thug vs. Royal Guard. Who really has the power? Welcome to our channel where we bring you incredible stories every day. Today we've got a truly unforgettable tale that will leave you speechless. But before we dive in, we'd love to hear from you. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss tomorrow's special story. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy this amazing journey with us. Mike Conway, a 27-year-old street thug, had earned his reputation the hard way. He wasn't someone you'd find in classrooms or polite company. No, Mike had spent most of his life in the gritty corners of London's roughest neighborhoods, finding trouble wherever he went. Today, however, he had strayed into an entirely different world, one that he couldn't have cared less about but was about to learn a painful lesson in. It was a chilly morning outside Buckingham Palace, the iconic home of British royalty, where tourists from around the world gathered in eager anticipation of the changing of the guard. But Mike didn't care about the tradition or history behind the ceremony. No, he was focused solely on the sense of power he wielded in any crowd. With his leather jacket and steel-toed boots, he walked with an arrogance that radiated from him like a wave. His muscled frame, hardened by years of street fights, seemed to part the crowd without him having to say a word. People instinctively moved out of his way as he prowled through the area, his eyes scanning for weakness, for anyone he could intimidate or cause trouble with. The sound of his boots hitting the pavement echoed through the air, sharp and deliberate, as if announcing to everyone around that Mike was someone you didn't mess with. His eyes narrowed as he caught sight of an elderly tourist who brushed against him while trying to avoid the crowd. Mike's lips curled into a sneer. "Oi, watch where you're going," he snarled, the gruffness of his voice cutting through the early morning stillness. The woman, clearly frightened, hurried away, clutching her handbag closer. Mike's world was one of aggression and intimidation. He wore his scars like badges of honor, each mark on his body a souvenir from the countless pub brawls, street fights, and violent encounters that had become the foundation of his existence. A scar above his right eye, still fresh and red from particularly bad fight, gleamed in the morning light as he stalked past another group of tourists, sending a few of them recoiling from his path. "Look at them, bunch of sheep," Mike muttered to himself, his voice filled with disdain as he shouldered past a young family trying to take photos by the palace gates. His words carried the rough edge of cheap cigarettes and cheap whiskey, habits he'd picked up over the years, fitting perfectly into the character he had built for himself. His reputation preceded him. The local police knew him all too well, his name often popping up in the files after nights that ended in bloodied knuckles and shattered windows. Despite his rough exterior, Mike couldn't ignore the electric buzz in the air as the crowd began to stir with excitement. The changing of the guard was about to begin, and he wasn't interested in the ceremony. But there was something about the disciplined march of the Queen's Guard that caught his attention. Something he couldn't help but sneer at. These men, with their immaculate uniforms and perfect discipline, seemed like perfect targets for him to toy with. His companions, Danny, Steve, and Craig, emerged from the shadows, their faces bruised from last night's trouble. They joined him, with knowing looks. "About time you lot showed up," Mike growled, accepting a half bottle of vodka from Craig. The sharp bite of cheap alcohol burned as he took a long pull, his eyes never leaving the approaching formation of royal guards. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as the guards marched closer, their synchronized steps, boots striking the ancient stone in perfect unison, created a rhythm that reverberated through the courtyard. To Mike, they looked like nothing more than well-dressed targets, their polished buttons and gleaming rifles. Nothing more than an elaborate costume waiting to be challenged. "Look at this," Mike scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt as he watched them approach. "The toy soldiers are coming out to play." His hands flexed instinctively, the same itch he'd felt before every fight, the one that told him it was time to break something. But the guards, moving with mechanical precision, were unaware of the challenge that Mike was about to throw their way. They marched forward, unwavering, as if nothing in the world could make them break their stride. But Mike wasn't one to back down from a challenge. "Let's see what they're really made of," he muttered under his breath, stepping directly into their path, blocking their way. The guards didn't flinch. They didn't hesitate. They simply kept marching, their faces as stoic as statues, their bodies moving with the kind of discipline Mike had never seen on the streets. Mike's pulse quickened, and the challenge was set. It was street violence meeting military precision. Mike stood there, blocking the guard's path, eyes narrowed in a mix of arrogance and contempt. His fists clenched at his sides, the anticipation of the fight humming in his veins like electricity. The Queen's Guard, unmoving and silent, continued their precise march, their boots striking the ground with rhythmic perfection. Mike didn't care about the ceremony, the tradition, or the discipline. To him, it was just another act, a show, and he wasn't interested in respecting it. He wasn't interested in anything but asserting his dominance, showing the world that no one could intimidate him, not even men dressed in immaculate uniforms. He took a step forward, his boots scraping against the ancient stone of the courtyard, as if challenging the very foundation beneath him. The tourists began to back away, sensing the tension in the air, their eyes darting between Mike and the guards. Phones rose, capturing every second, eager to catch whatever drama was about to unfold. The sun was still low, casting long shadows over the scene, but the temperature was rising, and it wasn't from the weather. Mike's voice rang out, loud enough for the guards to hear, but he didn't care. "You think you're tough, huh? All dressed up playing soldier," he sneered, his eyes never leaving the lead guard. "What are you gonna do? Stand there and look pretty? You think I'm scared of you?" His words carried a venomous edge, the challenge unmistakable. He was like a wild animal, pacing, ready to strike. His friends, Danny, Steve, and Craig, watched from behind, their faces a mixture of nervousness and excitement. They'd seen this before, Mike's tendency to pick fights with anyone who looked like they might put up a fight. But this was different. These weren't just street punks. These were soldiers, disciplined and trained to respond with precision, not to be provoked by cheap taunts. The lead guard's face remained impassive, as cold as the stone beneath their boots. He didn't acknowledge Mike's words. There was no flinch, no hesitation, just a steady, unbreakable gaze ahead. The other guards, marching in perfect synchrony, were equally unaffected, their posture as straight as their resolve. Mike's sneer deepened, but there was something in the air, a sense that his provocation wasn't going to land the way he expected. "You're in my way, and I'm not going anywhere," Mike growled, stepping forward again, closing the gap between them. The crowd had pulled back, but the circle around the confrontation grew tighter, the anticipation thick in the air. It was as if the very world held its breath, waiting for the clash. The guard's boots hit the stone, unyielding, a symbol of the years of discipline behind each step. Mike's eyes locked onto him, his jaw tightening with frustration. "Come on, man. What's it gonna be?" His words were laced with mockery, but beneath that, there was a flicker of doubt. Was he really ready to face these soldiers? Or was this just another street fight? A momentary display of power before the real consequences hit. The tension was unbearable. The crowd's murmurs faded into the background as Mike's challenge echoed through the courtyard. The lead guard finally spoke, his voice steady, unbothered. "Make way." Mike's lips curled into a smile, though there was no humor in it. He had been expecting that, just a simple order. What was a command to him? He had heard hundreds of those in his life, from cops, from judges, from people he'd heard along the way. None of it had ever mattered. "Not so fast," he shot back, raising his chin defiantly. "You want me to move, you're gonna have to make me." The lead guard's gaze shifted ever so slightly, a hint of something in his eyes, but it was gone before Mike could fully register it. The tension in the air was like a taut rope, pulled tighter with every passing second. The next moment, the lead guard's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Last warning, make way." There was no hint of anger, no sign of frustration in his tone, just pure, unwavering authority. The kind of authority that comes from years of training, years of discipline. This wasn't a game to them. This wasn't about proving who was stronger, who could throw the best punch. It was about duty, about tradition, and about the strength that came from being part of something much larger than oneself. Mike didn't understand that. All he saw was an opportunity to prove he wasn't afraid, to show that even a royal guard wasn't beyond his reach. But the guard's calmness, it was like a wall Mike could break, a wall he had broken before with just a swing of his fists. Or so he thought. With his fists clenched and his face set in determination, Mike took another step forward, only this time, there was no mocking smile. Just the cold determination of someone who wasn't about to back down. This was it, the moment of truth. The guard didn't flinch, didn't back away. He stood his ground, ready for whatever Mike was about to throw at him. And in that moment, Mike realized this was no street fight. This was a lesson in something far more powerful than anything he had ever known. The crowd stood frozen, holding their breath as Mike squared off with the lead royal guard. The air was thick with anticipation, the tension nearly unbearable. The distance, the sound of the guard's boots striking the stone echoed like the ticking of a clock, counting down the moments until something had to break. Mike stood firm, his fists clenched, the anger and adrenaline fueling his every movement. This wasn't just about a fight anymore. It was about proving himself, showing the world that no one, especially not a soldier, could walk all over him. He was a street thug, raised on violence and intimidation, and this was just another fight. To him, another opportunity to prove that he was the strongest, the toughest, and that nothing, no one could stand in his way. "Make me," Mike spat, stepping forward one more time, deliberately invading the guard's path. His eyes were locked onto the lead guard's face, searching for any sign of weakness, any hint that this soldier, this man in a uniform, wasn't as tough as he appeared. But the guard's face was an impenetrable mask, unflinching, his gaze forward, never acknowledging Mike's presence beyond the command that he had already given. Mike's chest heaved with anger, his breath coming in sharp, ragged bursts. He could feel the crowd's eyes on him, the heat of their stares pressing against him like a physical weight. He'd been the center of attention before, sure, but never like this. This wasn't some pub brawl or street fight where people cheered him on. This was something different. The uncertainty gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside, determined to show no fear. "Last warning," the guard said again, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made it clear this wasn't just a suggestion. It was an order. Mike's jaw clenched and his hands twitched, itching to strike. The itch in his knuckles was something he recognized well, a familiar signal that told him to act, to hit first, to dominate. He was a street fighter, a predator who had spent years learning how to control every situation. But this was different. The guard wasn't moving, wasn't flinching. There was no opening, no crack in the armor. Just a steady, unbroken wall of discipline. Without thinking, Mike lunged forward, his body shifting with the speed of a man used to fighting in tight spaces, in moments of chaos. His fist flew through the air, aimed straight at the guard's jaw, the first punch in what he thought would be a quick victory. But the moment his fist connected, Mike's world shattered. The guard didn't flinch, didn't even move. Mike's punch landed with a sickening thud, a sound that echoed through the courtyard like a gunshot. But it wasn't the satisfying crunch he had expected. It was more like hitting a brick wall wrapped in steel. The guard's jaw tightened, muscles firm beneath his uniform. The pain shot up Mike's arm in waves, his knuckles screaming in protest. The reality of what he had just done hit him like a freight train. His hand was on fire, the pain radiating through his fingers and into his wrist. Mike staggered back, his eyes wide in disbelief. He had just thrown his best punch, the kind of punch that had ended dozens of street fights, and it had done nothing. Nothing at all. The lead guard's eyes shifted, finally locking with Mike's. And in that moment, Mike saw it. The calmness, the focus, the calculated precision of a man who had faced far worse than this. It wasn't fear in the guard's gaze. It wasn't anger. It was just calm. The kind of calm that only came from real training, real combat. The kind of calm that came from knowing you could end this in a second, And still, you chose not. Is that all you've got? The guard's voice was low, almost mocking. It wasn't the tone of someone who was angry. It wasn't the tone of someone who had been provoked. It was the voice of a professional, someone who had seen violence, who had dealt with far worse than street punks. You hit like a woman. The words hit Mike harder than his punch had hit the guard. His breath caught in his throat, the weight of the insult sinking in. He had never been humiliated like this. In his world, he was the one who dished out the pain. He was the one who made people cower, made them respect him through fear. But now, this soldier, this man, had turned everything he believed upside down. Mike's face flushed with rage, but it wasn't the only thing he felt. There was something else there too, a growing realization that he wasn't in control of this situation. He wasn't the one calling the shots anymore. He was the one who was about to lose. Before Mike could react, before he could even think of a comeback, the guard moved. In one fluid motion, the guard's fist shot forward, faster than anything Mike had ever seen. There was no warning, no grand gesture, just the strike of a soldier who had been trained to neutralize threats in the quickest, most efficient way possible. The punch connected with Mike's jaw with a force that made his vision blur. The sickening crack of his bone dislocating rang out, louder than anything he had ever heard before. Mike's legs buckled, his mouth filling with blood. He tried to scream, but all that came out was a garbled cry. He staggered backward, his hands clutching at his broken jaw, the world spinning around him. The crowd gasped, some stepping back, others too stunned to move. Jake's friends, Danny, Steve, and Craig, took one look at him, then another, before they backed away, fear creeping into their expressions. This was no street brawl, this was something else entirely. This was a lesson in military discipline that Mike would never forget. The guard, unfazed by the chaos he'd just caused, returned to his position, his stance as straight and disciplined as ever. Mike, on the other hand, was crumpled on the pavement, unable to speak, unable to fight back. His world was now a blur of pain and humiliation. The world around Mike was spinning, a blur of pain and confusion. His mouth was filled with blood, his jaw a mangled mess, throbbing with a pain so intense, it felt as if his entire face was on fire. He barely registered the gasps from the crowd, their shocked murmurs mixing with the distant rhythmic sound of the guards' boots continuing their march without missing a beat. For a moment, Mike didn't know where he was. His knees buckled beneath him, and he collapsed face first into the stone pavement. His hands instinctively reached for his jaw, pressing against it, trying to stem the flood of blood. But no matter how hard he pressed, the pain didn't stop. His body, once a weapon that had taken down countless opponents, now felt like a broken shell of what it used to be. His vision wavered as he tried to rise, but his legs betrayed him, trembling under the weight of his own humiliation. This wasn't just a fight he had lost. It was a public, painful, and very real defeat. The rush of anger he had felt earlier was replaced by something far worse. Realization. Mike had crossed a line he couldn't come back from. The crowd, sensing the finality of the moment, began to murmur amongst themselves. Parents shielded their children's eyes from the violence, while others whispered to each other in disbelief. Some even pulled out their phones, capturing the moment for the world to see. Mike could hear the faint clicking of cameras, the sounds of his humiliation being immortalized in real time. He wanted to scream, to make them stop, but his mouth wouldn't cooperate. All he could manage was a gurgled, unintelligible cry. The words stuck in his swollen throat. As he struggled to move, trying to gather the strength to get up, the guard's calm, measured voice cut through the chaos. "That's how you throw a punch," he said, his tone devoid of emotion, as if what had just transpired was nothing more than a routine task. His words stung more than the physical pain, more than the dislocation of Mike's jaw. It was the realization that the man standing before him, this soldier, had effortlessly dismantled him, not through anger, but with the controlled precision of someone who had been trained for this exact moment. Mike's blood continued to drip onto the ancient stones of the courtyard, each drop marking his defeat in a scene that would soon be washed away. The guard didn't seem to care. His uniform was pristine, his stance unaltered by the violence he had just inflicted. Mike, on the other hand, was crumpled, broken, humiliated, and he could barely hold himself together long enough to process what had just happened. A sharp noise cut through the air, a sound Mike barely registered at first. It was the clack of boots, the arrival of more guards, joining the formation with the kind of precision that only years of military service could instill. The circle around Mike grew tighter as the new arrivals surrounded him, their movements synchronized, their eyes cold and focused. It was as if they were waiting for a moment to take action, to secure the situation. "Get off me," Mike tried to snarl, but the words barely escaped his lips, garbled and weak. The pain was so intense he couldn't think straight. His hands, slick with blood, couldn't find purchase on the stones beneath him, and he collapsed onto his side, groaning in agony. His mind was spinning, his pride shattered, and his body ached in ways he never thought possible. Two more guards stepped forward, their movements fluid and efficient. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. With practiced ease, they secured Mike's arms, their grip professional, unyielding. They didn't treat him like a thug. They treated him like a threat that had been neutralized. The lack of malice in their grip was even more humiliating than the punch. They weren't punishing him. They were doing their job. It was methodical, almost clinical. As the police sirens wailed in the distance, Mike's eyes darted around, hoping, praying for some kind of help. But the crowd had already turned their backs on him. His friends, Danny, Craig, and Steve, had scattered, vanishing into the crowd the moment the situation escalated. Their loyalty evaporated in the face of real consequences. They were gone, leaving Mike alone, vulnerable and defeated. The guards stood around him like sentinels, unmoving, their gazes forward, unwavering. They weren't concerned with Mike's defeat. They weren't worried about his bleeding face or the broken man on the ground. They were concerned with duty. They had handled the situation, and now it was over. As the police arrived, Mike could barely lift his head to see them approach. The officers moved with practiced efficiency, familiar with Mike's usual antics. But this time, there was no swagger, no bravado. There was nothing left. The usual threats and curses that would have flowed from his mouth were gone, replaced with the hollow, painful sounds of a man who had learned the hard way that some battles weren't meant to be won through violence. The police officer who spoke to Captain Harrison, the leader of the Royal Guards, was detached, professional. "Same troublemaker," he remarked, glancing at Mike's battered form. But then his voice softened and he looked at the guard. "I must say this is an improvement." Captain Harrison adjusted his gloves with a practiced, methodical motion, unfazed by the comment. Her Majesty's Guard was simply performing their duty in response to a direct assault, he stated calmly, the weight of centuries of military tradition behind his words. Mike's eyes, filled with confusion and pain, darted between the guards, the police, and the bystanders who were still filming. He couldn't speak. He couldn't fight back. He was just a broken man, sprawled on the stones, humbled by a lesson he had never expected. As the police secured him and began to walk him away, the crowd slowly began to disperse. The changing of the guard resumed, the march continuing as if nothing had happened. And for the guards, nothing had. They had done their duty. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just the quiet precision of soldiers who had faced real combat, and were, once again, unshaken by the world around them. And Mike? He was nothing more than a lesson to those who had watched, a reminder that not all battles are fought with fists, and not all challenges can be answered with force. Mike's body felt like it was failing him in every way possible. The weight of the guard's punch still reverberated through his skull, his jaw now a mass of throbbing pain and blood. As he was roughly dragged to his feet by the police, his legs could barely hold him up. His hands, slick with blood, shook, uncontrollably. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to regain some shred of dignity. But the reality of the situation was hitting him harder than any punch ever could. He was no longer the one in control. He was the one being handled. The guards. Around him were like statues, unmoving, their eyes trained forward with the kind of focus Mike had never known. The pain in his jaw was blinding, but it didn't even come close to the sting of humiliation that had taken root deep inside him. This wasn't just about a street fight he had lost. It was about being exposed, stripped bare of the bravado and false confidence that had defined him for so long. The crowd that had once feared him was now watching with curiosity and judgment, phones capturing every moment, every second of his failure. As the police moved him toward the awaiting patrol, Mike's vision blurred. He could barely focus on the officers' faces, just the sound of their boots on the pavement and the distant hum of the crowd behind him. His head swam with a mix of rage and disbelief. How had this happened? How had he gone from being the predator to the prey, with nothing to show for his violence but a shattered jaw and a bruised ego? The officer in front of him, a younger man with a clipboard, gave Mike a look of detached professionalism. "Same troublemaker," he muttered, flipping through his notes. Mike's mind barely registered the words, his body still fighting the overwhelming waves of pain. But then something shifted. The officer paused, looked at Mike with a sort of clinical curiosity, and then spoke again, softer this time. "I have to say, this is an improvement." Mike tried to snarl, to lash out, but his words came out as an incoherent jumble, his mouth too swollen to form any real sound. The officer wasn't wrong. This was an improvement for Mike, but not in the way he would have hoped. He had faced a world of street violence, but nothing had prepared him for this level of discipline, this level of authority. The guards' calm, unwavering control had shattered him, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. Captain Harrison, the leader of the Royal Guards, stood by with the kind of composed professionalism that Mike would never understand. His gaze flicked over to the officer, then back to Mike, who was still struggling to maintain any semblance of defiance. Her Majesty's Guard was simply performing their duty in response to a direct assault, Harrison stated matter-of-factly, his voice as cold and precise as the military uniform he wore. Mike's eyes darted around, the humiliation gnawing at him. The voices of the crowd, the flash of cameras, the stares from passers-by. It was all too much. He had been reduced to a spectacle, a warning to anyone who might think of challenging the Royal Guards again. And for what? A moment of bravado? A misguided need to prove himself? The officers secured Mike in the back of a police car, and as the door slammed shut, he finally let out a strangled groan of frustration. His hands were cuffed, his jaw a mess of blood and bone. But it wasn't the physical pain that consumed him. It was the loss of the fight, the loss of his pride, the loss of his reputation. The streets didn't seem so familiar anymore. The world outside the car felt cold, distant, like a place he no longer belonged. As the car pulled away from Buckingham Palace, the morning sun shone brightly, casting long shadows over the ancient stones of the courtyard. The changing of the guard continued uninterrupted, a symbol of military precision and discipline that had stood the test of time. Mike, however, was no longer part of that world. He was just another reminder that sometimes the hardest lessons are learned not through fists or words, but through the quiet, unshakable strength of those who are trained to stand firm, no matter the challenge. His friends, Danny, Steve, and Craig, had long since disappeared into the crowd, too afraid to face the consequences of their actions. Mike was left alone in the back of the police car, staring out the window at the life he once knew. The world outside was moving on without him, leaving him behind in the wake of his own foolishness. The officers exchanged glances as they drove, their expressions unreadable. For them, this was just another day. For Mike, it was a moment of reckoning. He had learned the hard way that not all battles are fought on the streets, and not all warriors wear leather jackets and scars. Sometimes the real fight is against yourself, and as the car disappeared into the distance, leaving the iconic gates of Buckingham Palace behind, Mike could only wonder how long it would take for his pride to heal, if it ever would. What do you think about this intense encounter between a street thug and the royal guard? It's a story that goes beyond physical strength. It's a lesson in discipline, respect, and knowing when to choose your battles. Mike thought he could intimidate anyone, but in the face of the Queen's Guard, he learned the hard way that some battles are not won through force. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think Mike learned his lesson, or will he go back to his old ways once he's healed? What would you have done if you were in his position, facing off against a professional soldier? Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone underestimated their opponent, only to regret it later? Or perhaps you've seen a real-life example of someone being humbled by someone with more training or experience. Let us know in the comments below where you're watching from and share your personal stories or thoughts on this confrontation. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that challenge our assumptions and teach us powerful lessons. We'll be back tomorrow with another incredible story that you won't want to miss.